We all have a story to tell. Let's tell yours. Welcome to the Intellectual People Podcast with your host, Jason. Come together and listen to journey stories and more from interesting people. Welcome your host, Jason.
Today on the Intellectual People Podcast, I have Steve Stepp of HydraStepp. How are you doing today, Steve?
Great, Jason. Great.
Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, I want to go back into your history of how you actually got started in boating.
My dad always had a boat at the little boat club on the Ohio River. And we, before we ever got out of high school, we'd play with the boat and everything. And he got me really interested, my brother and I, interested in boating and water skiing.
Okay. And did you get into building with him? How did that actually come about?
No, another gentleman who belonged to the boat club there, who boat raced. He had a little 14-foot Crosby and outboard, and he would go around the country boat racing. He was a salesman for heavy equipment by trade, but I got into helping him at the boat ramp at the boat club, testing props and stuff. So I'd drive his car and pull him in and out. And so did that for a while. And he said, "Well, would you like to go to a boat race with me?" And I said, "Sure." That sounds like great fun. Yeah. So that sort of got me the bug. Yeah. And once I went to the first boat race and seen what that was all about, and racing and good competition and nice people. So.
And where did you go from there? So you went boat racing with him at some point. Did he let you drive?
No, I ended up going, I think, one summer with him. And then over the winter, I ended up buying a boat, same hull that he had, just like he had, a 14-footer. And didn't have the money to buy the motor, but at least I got the boat.
Okay.
And then later on got a trailer and got a motor. And then that next summer went to a couple boat races myself and drove and found out the bug really got me then. And so then another friend of mine that he boat raced also, we got talking about buying this little Mercury outboard dealership there in town.
Oh.
So that was the summer I got out of high school. So we ended up buying that little dealership, and I worked it at night. He worked it during the day, and I still worked for a construction company operating equipment.
So you're 18, 19 at this point, roughly?
Yeah, just got out of high school.
Just got out of high school. Wow. Yeah. Interesting. And what were you doing in construction?
Well, my dad was always in construction. So as soon as I graduated from high school, I went to work for his building contractor. Of course, I wanted to get away from my dad a little bit and get out in the real world and work. So this guy put me in charge of bulldozer and backhoe and stuff like that.
Okay. And then you ran the dealership at night.
Yeah.
On the boat.
Yeah, ran the construction, or worked at the construction job for 3 years, then worked at night and on weekends at the boat shop.
Wow. Then
finally decided to buy my partner out and quit the construction business so I could start full-time in the boat business.
Okay. And is that where Velocity Boats came in?
No, I didn't. I worked that for, I don't know how many years it was. That was 1962, 63.
Okay.
And I boat raced all that time during the summer. And, want to do it year round. So I said, the only place to do that's Florida. So I end up building the dealership up, built a couple of buildings, and I'd end up selling them. So in 76, I decided to want to move to Florida.
From where? Where were you?
Southern Ohio.
Southern Ohio.
Yeah, okay. Right on the Ohio River. So put my house up in the market, and it sold in 2 weeks, and put the business up, and it finally sold. And I'd promised myself that summer, 4th of July, I'm going to Florida. One way or another, I'm packing up, going to Florida.
Wow.
So I'd already ended up buying a house down there. So ended up moving to Florida. And really, I had a job at Richard Bertram Yachts, selling yachts. But it was in Miami, and my house was in Lighthouse Point.
Okay.
And that was quite a drive, and I didn't want to drive that. So I decided I didn't want to do that. So I promised myself I'd loaf for a year. And of course, I bought and sold 3 boats loafing that year. But that still wasn't enough. And that's when I started Velocity.
So Velocity Boats starts when and what year?
That was about 77.
77. And you knew that you wanted to build race boats.
Well, racing was still in my blood. And that year that I promised myself I wouldn't do anything was probably the worst year I ever spent.
Really?
Because I didn't have any purpose. After racing for so many years, from 62 to 76, then all once quit, and you sort of lived and died by racing when you do it that long that, where we're going this month or this week, or how long is it going to take to drive it, getting prepared and do this and all at once. You don't have anything.
Right.
Tried to play tennis and that didn't work out very good. That's too much energy and not enough challenge to it that I wanted, so I rented a building and bought me some lumber and got started and spent the first year building the first Velocity 30-footer.
30 foot.
And showed it at the Miami Boat Show in February of 78.
And this was a race boat or a pleasure boat?
It was a pleasure boat.
It was a pleasure boat. And describe what this, actually, let's go back really quickly here to explain to the people that don't know, when you say you got some lumber to build a boat, because a lot of people don't realize back in the day when you started, right, how boats, and they're still done this way by some people, but building the structure, the negative, if you will, right, of the hull out of lumber, and everything is reversed, correct?
Well, we actually built the plug, a running plug.
Right.
And it's a real boat. Then after I got through running and testing it, then I built the mold off of it.
Okay.
Then I could produce the boats out of the mold, out of fiberglass.
Right. And the lumber that you say, though, you build a structure that resembles the plug, if you will, correct?
Yes.
And then that's out of 2x4s and various other types of wood and plywood, if you will, and you build that so it resembles the plug. Then you actually make the plug, right?
No, I actually built the boat itself.
You did?
Yeah, built the boats. And the reason why I do that way is I can run the boat and test it. And then the plug itself is a real boat.
Okay.
And put fiberglass on the outside to smooth it up and everything. Sure. And it looks just like a real boat. And it is a real boat, except it's all built on the inside with, kumi plywood and basswood and different types of woods and stuff to put in the right place. And I built the first 30-footer like that. And I built my first 40-footer like that also.
Interesting. So then you go and you start testing it, right?
Yes.
And you work on the bottom of the boat and you see how fast it'll run, how it will handle, make sure it doesn't chine walk, correct?
Well, the chine walking, you can design features in that make a chine walk, that won't make a chine walk, but it make it easier to drive.
Okay.
But you can also design where it run faster, but you got to drive the chine walk out of it. So there's different ways that you can do it that way. But usually chine walk is really controlled by the person behind the steering wheel.
So then how do you decide as a boat builder what you want? Do you want speed and the driver actually to have to really wheel it? Or do you decide I want something that's really comfortable to drive, safe to drive, but it might not have that ultimate top speed?
My attitude then on that particular boat was to make it fast, but make it drivable by inexperienced people.
Fair enough.
Because like on the bass boats, we were running, 60, 70, 80 mile an hour on the bass boats, and those guys knows how to drive.
Right.
But the guys in offshore then, only thing they knew how to make a boat go fast was to put more money in the engine compartment, which there's more ways to doing it than that, through bottom design. And they didn't know anything about driving. If they got it to go fast enough to chine walk, only thing they knew is either let off the throttle, trim the drives in, or put the tabs down.
Gotcha.
Because they had no clue on how to drive chine walk out of the boat. But the bottom of the boat, to drive chine walk out, you can't do it with the bottoms that they were doing, which is just a standard 24-degree V that Ray Hunt designed for Dick Bertram back in the 60s. And that's what a lot of companies still right now today is using that bottom design. And it was antiquated 40-some years ago, and it's still antiquated. So that's one thing I did to the bottom design, because through OPC Racing, I'd go, in the summertime, I'd open my boat shop at 9 o'clock. Well, I'd be down to Riverbank at 6:30 testing. Well, I get 30, 40 tests in before I open shop up. So you just test, and go to race and try what you learn, and you just progress that way.
So how fast was your 30-foot?
Well, the first boat I put together with twin 370 stern drive, Mercruiser, just stock
Yep.
stern drives with TRS drives. And it'd run 75 to 80.
Wow. That's incredible.
And at that point, the cigarettes and the Magnum was our hot sellers, and they made a 28, much smaller than my boat and lighter, but they would only run 65 at the same power.
Okay. So where do you go from there? Now you have a 30-foot, you have a 40-foot, right?
Well, I built a 30-footer up until 81. Then I
Okay.
built the 40-footer.
Okay. And then what came after a 40-footer?
Ended up doing a 22-foot.
Wow. And what was that for?
Just a single engine outboard.
Single engine pleasure.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And did you ever get back to racing?
Yeah, I never did quit.
Well,
So once I got velocity going,
Mhm.
and then I think the number 2 boat or number 3 boat, I ended up building a race boat, a P-class race boat,
Okay.
and campaigned it.
And how well did you do with that?
Done good. Done
Did
real
you?
good. Yeah. And then sold, I think, he's the second or third one to Gene Whip in Sarasota, who used to own Gulfwind Marine,
Okay.
real famous racer. He'd raced, and he's originally from Dayton and raced hydroplanes. And the only guy who won the President's Cup in hydroplanes, and he won it and quit. Same
Really?
day, because that was so dangerous that he knew that he was driving way over his head, and that's what he had to do to win.
Wow.
So he gave himself a reprieve and just quit right then.
That's incredible. Well, it's the way to go, right? Go
Yeah.
out on top.
Yeah.
So then where does velocity go? How successful is velocity at this point? You've got a 30, you've got a 40, you've got a 22.
Well, I originally started building a 30, and I just wanted a small company, and I want to build one a month. So at one time I had 13 boats sold, and I got to thinking, I said, well, maybe I need to build some more. And I sort of regret that. I say now that don't build more boats, just raise the price.
Ah.
You know?
And how many employees do you have at this point?
Oh, I don't remember exactly, but maybe 6 or 8 or 10.
Okay. So a decent amount. It's a decent sized small business.
Yeah.
Right. So you start building more boats.
Yeah, decided to build more boats, and that's when I decided to build the 41 and then the 22-footer. I might have built I think I've done them about both at the same time, because in 81 is the year I took the 30, and Mercury came out with some 475 horsepower turbocharged 454 cubic inch with number 2 Speedmasters. Well, Reggie Fountain, friend of mine, he got the first set of motors. He decided he was wanting to get into offshore boats too. We raced against each other in OPC, the smaller boats. So Reggie was wanting to get into bigger boats, and he called me and told me his plan and wanted me to sell him bare hulls and decks and him rig them out or take them to Lake X. And I said, nah, just rather not do it that way. I want total control of what I'm doing.
Right.
So he ended up doing a deal with a company called Excalibur.
Okay.
So that's when he came out with the Executioner. Well, the first set of those twin turbos went in one of Reggie's boats, and they had it at Lake X for like 6 months, according to Don Swepp's getting it dialed in and everything. And they got to run 86 miles an hour.
Wow.
So I got the second set of motors, and Don Swepp, who's a great guy, that he's passed away now, but he used to run the lake and run it with an iron fist, just sort of like Mr. Keycafer was. And so I got the boat all ready, and Don says, well, bring it up here and make sure we're going to start it up.
Right.
And make sure water pressure is right and everything, where it's cool, and pulling the heat out of those turbos and making it run right. So we went up there and got it running, and first pass I made was 86 or 87, something like that. And that's with a stopwatch, and you run between 2 buoys.
Right.
So you get an accurate speed. Then that way you can gauge what your speedometer is accordingly. So I came in and gave Don the stopwatch. He said, man, that's great. I said, well, I think it ought to run a lot faster than that. And he asked me how fast I think it ought to run. Well, in the back of my mind, I already had the 100-mile-an-hour in my head, but I didn't want to say that. I might embarrass myself, So I said, well, I don't know. It ought to run faster than that. And he said, well, he said, we worked 6 months on Reggie's boat and finally got to run 86 miles an hour. And I said, well, and Reggie ended up he knew the step and the transom and the pad bottom. So he copied my theory that I'd already had, because he knew that was the right way to do things to make V-bottom run fast.
Right.
And that's what he always did. But I didn't like the propellers that they had available for those number 2 Speedmaster. So I went in the back room and dug through the scrap pile and found me 2 props. And they had the number 2 Speedmaster had a short shaft to it.
Okay.
But which makes the rake on the prop different and doesn't put it back far enough from the boat the way I want it to be. So I ended up finding 2 long hub props that had been recessed and drilled where you could put them on a short shaft. And I brought them in and asked Don. I said, Don, can I try these? He said, them's old junk props. He said, them's no good. I said, well, I can try them. He said, okay. So I go to put them on the boat and they hit the cavitation plate. So he just takes the props back in the room and grind the tips down so they don't hit. So I got out and run the boat and it run like 91 miles an hour through the traps then. Gained that much speed. And I said, how much you want for them, Don? He said, they're no good. You can have them. So I went home and went back to Pompano, working on the boat, the trim angle and stuff and airflow, fuel flow, all this basic stuff that you got to have for a boat and done some more prop work. I found another set of those props so I could beat on the second best prop to make them outrun the first. Then once you get that to first, then you set them aside and beat on the second again,
Yeah.
So you keep going up the ladder and then finally when it went back up there, we ran over 100 miles an hour.
Wow. So you always have a gold set of props, right? Like the gold standard, if you will, of the prop, the prop that you're trying to beat. And then you work and massage on the second set, and then you kind of swap once you get that second set better than the first.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So sometimes you take a chance and you work on your best set, but sometimes that always don't work,
right?
Because you're testing and you don't always go forward. Sometimes you go backwards. So.
Okay. So you have a boat that runs really fast, and what's Velocity doing now? They're still getting orders in.
Yeah, we're selling boats, displaying at the Miami Boat Show. That's where I started my only boat show for since I started Velocity.
Okay.
Then we showed there and selling boats right along. And the 22 took off real good. The 40 was a little slower, but what I'd done on the 40-footer, I'd built a race boat, and we raced it for 3 years, and then I took it apart and then made a mole off of it.
So is that known as Big Red? Is
Yes.
that where Big Red came in?
Yep.
Okay.
That was Big Red.
That's Big Red.
Yeah.
So tell the people what Big Red actually was and still is to this day, and then update them on Big Red today, because there's some big news with Big Red. Yeah.
I designed it and built it 40 years ago this year. And I raced it for 2-3 years. It was so expensive to race and you need a deep pocket, because we ran open class. What we had to run against all the big people that money was no object to them. And It was a big object to me.
And explain what it cost back then, even if you don't mind.
Well, when you could run open class, if you won first prize, you might won 10 to 12,000.
Wow.
If you raced and rebuilt the motors and the outdrives, ever raced like you're supposed to, because the engines weren't good enough, the outdrives weren't good enough, and you had to do it. But all the expense of that and going to the race and fuel and everything, you could spend $13,000 to $16,000 real easy.
Okay.
So there's no way you're going to make any money.
Right. And the boat
that's if you won.
Yeah, and then boat itself was 100,000.
100 plus, yeah.
100 plus. Okay.
Yeah. And you didn't have any insurance on it.
Right. No, and you didn't have paid people working on it, right?
Right.
That was the other thing.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So I raced it for 2-3 years on and off, and with Gene Whip, and 1 year we got to go to World Championship, and Mercury said, we'll take care of everything.
Wow.
And that's down there. It's a 3-race circuit. So all the big dogs, Jerry Jacoby, Betty Cook, and a lot of them, they had fresh motors each day and fresh outdrives each day. Wow. So Mercury stepped up and they took care of the engine. They had come out with a new 4-bolt main block. Mm-hmm. And so they was testing it a little bit too. But the boat runs so fast with the 3-blade props that they had, that the Mercury had thinned the props down so much, and I could run it through the choppy water so fast that would breaking blades off tips of props.
Wow. And
they didn't have anything any heavier. So the first race we got into, we threw the tip off prop and ended up wiping out an outdrive. And we had problems, but that night at the banquet, the start of the thing, everybody knew And Betty Cook told the people, said, well, Steve's got the best chance of winning because I could run with any of the cats in calm water.
Right.
Then in the V-bottoms, I could run with any V-bottom in ever how rough they want to go.
That's
so
awesome.
So I had the best advantage of both worlds. I just needed the equipment to hold together to be able to do it. And that year, Jerry Jacoby with Keith Hazel throttling, they end up winning. But out of 30 boats, I think it was, they're the only ones who never had any trouble.
Wow.
So you got to hold everything together.
Absolutely.
And you couldn't go out and run on rough water. Depends on if it's rough water, you beat the boat and the engines one way. But if it's calm water, you just raw dog the motors they're wide open all the time.
Yep.
And you had to run smart. You had to run just stay ahead of the guy behind you, not try to run off and leave him because you're just wearing your equipment out.
Gotcha.
Like I've always said, I'd rather break down in first than to finish second.
I get that. I really do get that. So now Big Red is successful, right? And I would imagine that Velocity, people are starting to take notice of what Velocity is doing out in the racing world, correct?
Yes.
And people now are starting to say, I want a Velocity for pleasure boating or start racing myself, maybe. Right.
Yeah, we was getting orders good, and was getting different guys wanting to race, and we end up setting 10 world speed records with the Velocity hull. Wow. I had set 4 before got into building Velocity, but with the Velocity hull design and me helping the customers, we end up setting 10 records, won 8 world championships, 7 national championships.
Incredible.
And the hull design just worked. We just run faster than the other V bottoms because it's a higher tech bottom design. And Big Red really showed what it would do because it ran in the big class.
Right.
So I ran it for 2 or 3 years, then took it back apart, sanded it all down, took the mold off of it, then put it back together. Wow. And ran it, I think, for a year or so. Then a friend of mine, a neighbor, wanted to buy it, so I sold it to him. Well, he ran it with another good friend of mine, Ed Bienkowski, and they ran it for 2-3 years, something like that, on and off, because it's just so expensive to run unless you just had a lot of cash sitting around the house you want to burn up, compared to the competition, because the other people it was having to run against just had unlimited budget.
Right.
And it just made it really rough. But Mike and Ed ran it for quite a while, and they ended up putting it up, and it was in that building. My daughter wanted to buy it, and she seen Mike had it for sale, so I went down and made a deal on it. And when I pulled it out of that building, it hadn't been out of that building in 30 years. He
literally just parked it.
Yeah.
30 years it sat. And what kind of shape's it in now?
It's in great shape.
Is it really?
Yeah. My daughter Amanda wants to make it a pleasure boat and leave it. First, all about putting outboards on it. Then we said, no, let's leave it a stern drive. But we're going to leave the outside just need to be touched up on the hull part. The deck, going to re-clear the deck on the thing and touch up a little bit of the paint on it. But it had just 3-man bolster. It just hauled 3 people. But I cut that storage compartment out and the bolster out to where we can put 4 seats in it.
Okay.
And then we're going to leave it staggered motors and make it just a good poker run boat or a play boat.
So is it going to stay in Florida, or is it going to go back to where she lives?
She lives in Richmond, Kentucky, and they boat on Cumberland.
Okay.
Cumberland.
That's a heck of a boat, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So is it almost done?
No, we just, she's no big hurry. She don't need it till springtime. So I got the holes all filled up on the dash because we're going to redo that. And then I got the holes all filled up in the transom because we want to put different outdrives on it. Because then I had number 3 Speedmasters, and we really haven't decided yet what motors to put in it. But probably, looking at 565s with Bravos, and that would run at 95 to 100 right in that range.
And miles per gallon?
Don't care. Hope it, like I tell people at boat shows, we try to see how much gas it will use, because usually if it uses more gas, it's going to go faster.
That's funny. That's funny. And it's your daughter's money now, right? So you don't care. Well, that's a really nice, great story. So, I mean, a poker run, that would be really cool if she would do some poker runs with it.
Yeah. Well, they have a big poker run weekend after Labor Day. They're on Lake Cumberland.
Oh, one up there. I thought
Yeah.
you meant the one down here in Florida.
Well, she'll probably want to run some of these in the wintertime down here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they do one in Cumberland as well.
Yeah, they do a big one up there.
Do they?
And she's lucky to marry a guy too. Jack really loves boats and bass fished all his life, and his dad got him into boating. So
Okay.
yeah, so they're a good boating couple.
That's great. So now, take me to where Velocity is at that point now, if you will.
Well, we kept on adding different models. We ended up putting the 30-footer and the 22 and the 40.
Okay.
Then we got to a certain point, and I just had so much business, and South Florida was so bad for us getting people to work. And I ended up doing a deal. This was in '86, working deal out with Regal.
Really?
Mm-hmm, with
Regal Boats.
Regal Boats here in town. Yeah, Dwayne Cook. I used to sell their boats when I was in Ohio.
Okay.
And so I was familiar with them, and super nice people. So I ended up working a deal with them. And what happened about that time, like Sea Ray and Chris Graff and a bunch of other bigger companies was trying to get in the performance business. And they couldn't build that reputation. They would buy somebody like me, which I'd worked a deal with Regal, where they could get into the performance business. Sea Ray had done, they tried to came out with their own called Pachanga, but it never was really performance. It just looked a little bit and had the Sea Ray name on it.
So were they buying hulls from you?
I first started off, I was building the hulls, and they'd totally rig them out. And
Really?
then we finally moved all the construction of the boat and everything to Regal.
Wow.
But they didn't start building a 40. They built a 22 and built a 30. And then we designed and built a 23-footer, which is more European looking style.
Okay.
And so they built them, and I babysat the project for a year, and then wasn't busy enough for me. So I went and I was on a lease basis, so I didn't have a non-compete. So I started a boat company called Thoroughbred, and I started making a 26-footer, then I made a 28-footer.
Okay.
And then later on, a few years, Regal and I separated, and I got the Velocity name back.
Okay. So they had the name as well.
Yeah, they had the name Velocity.
Were they selling under the Velocity banner as well?
Mm-hmm.
They
Yes.
were. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, they put the Regal name on it and a serial number on it, but it was a Velocity.
Okay. Understood. Okay. And then, so you're selling Thoroughbred?
Yeah, I started off selling Thoroughbreds, and we were selling 26, 28 footers. I think in 80s, maybe late 80s or early 90s, maybe it had to be the early 90s, then got the Velocity back and end up dropping the Thoroughbred name and just went straight with Velocity.
Gotcha.
And then I think it's been about 7 or 8 years ago, then I sold Velocity to a gentleman over in Tampa.
Okay. And so you're completely out of Velocity now?
Yeah.
Do you miss it?
Missed the high performance part of it and the customers. You know, we had some real good customers.
Mm-hmm.
We our customers really was loyal, and we treat them as friends. And we go to poker run, like one year at the Jacksonville poker run. Reggie'd always show up, and all his customers, and the Formula people, the porters on the Formula, they'd show up, a bunch of their customers. So one year Reggie told the people running, said, "I'm going to have more fountains here next year than anybody." So that was sort of a throw-out competition, because Reggie and I always trying to outdo each other. So the next year we got on it, and we would call our customers and come show up and this and that, and we'd have at a motorhome, have parties, and of course the women like going to motorhome, drink wine. The guys won't stand out on the dock, drink beer, and talk about race motors, you know. So, but we ended up that year having, I think it's like 30 some boats there, and more than the Fountain or the Formula did.
So how many Velocity boats did you sell from the time you started Velocity to the time you sold it? Do you have any idea?
No, I don't know. I've never had that question asked me quite a few times, and I've just never did really figure it out.
What was the hardest part of running that business?
The people, dealing with people, getting them to work and motivated to do a good job.
So employees, not necessarily customers.
Right.
Yeah. And how many people did you have at the height of Velocity?
I think about 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
And were you actively on the floor building as well?
I was a production manager. I usually had one or two salesmen, and I'd be my own production manager besides my what job I needed to do in the office.
Wow.
And I'd have things moving along. We might be building 6, 7 single engine boats a month.
Wow.
So I thought, well, I'll get me a production manager, and first thing I knew, I'd be down to 5 boats a month.
Right.
So I always had trouble, getting a production manager to do it like I wanted to do it.
I get that.
And really, because I'm a hands-on type person.
Yep.
Was
it a good business?
Yeah. It was a good business. Yeah.
It was not only good in terms of feeding your passion, but you were able to raise a family, I presume, from it, right? That was your main source of income.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was good years, good profitable years, and some lean years.
Sure.
Like any kind of business, goes up and down.
Yep.
And depends on the gas prices and the insurance costs and finance costs and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
That make it good years or bad years. But it was a great business, and very fortunate got to spend my life doing
it.
What I enjoy doing.
So then you sell Velocity. What do you do? What did you do after you sold Velocity?
Well, I got more serious about playing golf, but got problems with my back from all the years of boat racing and motorcycle racing. So, but I'd started, once I quit racing, before I sold Velocity, I'd got into competing in a long drive competition in golf.
Oh, wow.
And of course, I looked at the golf club like a prop. Take a hammer, beat and bang on the prop, make you do what you want to do. So I looked at the driver the same way. I said, well, I can do this to it and that to it. So I got fooling with that. And in 96, I won the state of Florida in the senior division.
Really?
And they started the senior division at 45, and I was already 52 or 3, something like that.
Okay.
And so I won the state of Florida and got to go to the World Long Drive Finals in Las Vegas. And of course, I beat everybody around here, but when you go out there, it's on the big scale and it's on TV.
Right.
And the nerves get to you. And of course, I'd been around enough setting records and stuff.
And what's a record? Like I know nothing about that. So tell us what's a long drive? How far?
Well, you compete in your age group.
Okay.
See, so the open class, it was from 45 years old down, and usually the 20s and the 30 guys are a much better shape and hit the ball longer.
Absolutely.
Because every year, once especially you get up over 50, man, every year or two, you just get shorter and shorter and shorter. So I was spotting the guys 6, 7 years at 45.
Wow.
Well, I ended up getting out there, but I didn't. You got to get 6 balls in the fairway. You got 40 yard wide, sometimes 40, sometimes 50, but you got 6 balls. The longest one to count. The rest of them, they don't care what happened to them. And it's got to land in the fairway and in between the lines and stay there. They can run out, but it's got to stay there. So I did the typical thing that a new person does, get up there and didn't hit any of the balls in the fairway. So I didn't even find out if I was competitive or kidding myself or what,
Gotcha.
So I went to work harder on it next year, and I ended up eliminate myself, hurt my back, and but I ended up getting back on it, and I competed at the World Finals in Vegas for 12 years.
Did you really?
Yeah, went all the way through the every age group, because every 5 years they come out with a different age group.
Wow!
But I competed up until I think 6 or 7 years ago. But the best I ever finished was 3rd one year.
That's pretty awesome.
And but I was in the top 5 just about every year.
Wow!
So,
do you still play at all?
Play every now and then, about every month or two.
What do you shoot?
Not very good now.
What did you shoot in your best day? What did you shoot?
Well, we was lucky when we first moved up here. I never played golf before. I helped my dad build a couple of golf courses, but never played golf. Okay. So when we moved up here, we joined Heathrow and playing golf. And we ended up getting acquainted with Phil Ritson, which had a golf studio here. Okay. And within a year, I shot par.
Wow.
But I had all the lessons. He was needing a golf studio. He was going to build one over at the Kmart. So I built some out of fiberglass for him and just took it out in golf lessons. So my wife and I, we got to get the best. If you're going to learn something, like I've told people before, you can probably learn it on your own if you live long enough.
Right.
But if you want to get good at something, doesn't matter what it is. Mm-hmm. You just get lessons from a professional, and then it all depends on your desire and your ability to what you can do.
Absolutely. So your back starts bothering you. You decide what?
Well, I end up playing less and less golf. Then my wife and I, she was talking about she wanted to go to Alaska. So we bought a camper and drove to Alaska and gone 4 months and traveled 18,000 miles. And we enjoyed that and got back. We sold the camper. We thought, well, we ain't going to do that anymore. Then we already started talking about doing it again. But then after that, I decided I want to build me a fishing boat because I got a good friend, Bobby Vaughn in the Keys and gone fishing with, and then Peter Deeks over here in Mosquito Lagoons. Both those guys are professional guides.
Okay.
And it's like Bill Dance, he comes to Mosquito Lagoon, he goes fishing with Peter Deeks. Great guy, great fisherman. And then Bobby Vaughn takes Roland Martin out. When Roland goes down there, wants to catch tarpon, takes him down to Boca.
Have you been a fisherman?
No, fishing just something you do while you're sitting there drinking a beer in the boat and letting the motors cool down so you can take off again.
Okay. So now you're going to build a boat to go fishing, even though you don't really fish, but you're going to learn to fish because it's a boat.
Well, I've always fished. That just wasn't my passion,
Understood.
Yeah, because my dad always I'd go bass fishing up there on the river with my dad and loved to fish and everything. Just that I'd rather go fast if I'm on a boat.
Understood.
Just sitting there. So I don't know a lot about fishing, but I know quite a bit about building a hull.
Sure.
To do what it needs to do. So of course, a good friend of mine, Darius Allison, builds the Allison Craft boats. But he's more like a rocket scientist when it designs boats and stuff. Mm-hmm. And they're great boats, but it's not really a saltwater boat. And these flats fishermen, which is the inshore guys, and I didn't want to get back out in rough water again because I can't stand it with my back. So something for the inside water. And I studied the inshore boats for quite a while, what they do and what they want and everything. Mm-hmm. And my wife says I started 2 sticks on the ground in the garage, and it's pretty much how it started. But I built it like I did my 30 and my 40 footer.
Really? Same pad design, or is it slightly different?
Same theory. Measurements are all different because of the speed and the weight of the boat and stuff like that.
So this company, if I'm not mistaken, is called HydraStepp. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I named it. And
obviously, the step part is your last name, correct? Yep. And Hydra is water, right?
Yep.
So what was the real purpose? Was to build a boat for yourself to go fish, or to help these gentlemen out with a inshore flats fishing boat?
My first was to just build it for myself.
Okay.
And I got it all done, started testing it, and it turned out real good. And I was pleased at how it turned out and how the speed I got out of it and the stability part of it and how it gets on plane and just a lot of advantages over some of these other boats. Then I thought about selling it off to another company and just sell the hull design and just keep one for myself.
Sure.
But then I thought, well, I need something to do and enjoy it. I'm not ready to quit and sit on the porch in a rocker.
Yep.
Yeah. So I ended up taking the mold off of it and started producing them. And we're moving right along with it now. Showed it at a few boat shows and getting some orders. And so
tell people what this boat, because I saw you at the Daytona boat show, I believe it was, and you have a little sign up and it has some specs that are incredible. The miles per gallon with the, I believe it is a Mercury engine on it, correct?
Yes. Mercury Pro XS 115.
115. And you're still, after all of these years, you're still Mercury.
Yeah, just partial to Mercury. And
that's great.
I sold Mercury test boats, designed and built them test boats for 35 years.
Awesome.
And just got a good working relationship with a lot of the people at Mercury.
Loyalty, something that doesn't really exist today.
Yeah.
Right? So it's got a 115 on it, and it gets how many miles per gallon?
With the 115, 2 people in it loaded down at 30 miles an hour, you can get 10 miles to a gallon of gas. And actually, I've seen more than that on it. I just advertise that because that still outdoes everybody else.
Right.
Because most other boats with that same motor is down to 5 to 6 miles.
Amazing. And the top speed of this boat?
Loaded with everything, it runs 60 plus, 62, 63 mile an hour. I've seen it with the light load, just myself in it and light on gas, 73.
Unbelievable. And what size engine could it take?
Well, I've limited horsepower to 150.
150.
Just because the speed it runs.
What will it do with a 150 on it though?
I've sold a few of them with the 150s, but the people didn't care how fast it went.
Okay.
So I really didn't work on it, but had one run 75.
Wow.
But I didn't, that was sort of loaded down.
Yeah.
But what they run 65 loaded, 2 people in it, everything get on it.
And the hull, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, is a carbon fiber Kevlar with fiberglass?
Yeah, I use a 12-ounce Kevlar material, 1208. And so Kevlar by itself is flexible somewhat in a panel because it doesn't absorb resin. The resin encapsulates the fiber. So if you put solid Kevlar in a panel, it's a little bit flexible unless you've got enough stiffness of foam coring, something like that. Well, I used to use a Kevlar and carbon fiber mixture.
Okay.
But now they've come out with a e-glass in it, which makes a little bit more price reasonable because you got to just keep putting that price over onto the customer and keep raising it up. So the Kevlar e-glass together is a good mixture because the e-glass soaks up resin. So it's right next to the Kevlar. The only thing would be any better if you could use S-glass, but S-glass is sort of a controlled substance in a way. They don't really sell it in a mass form like e-glass or Kevlar.
Really?
So it's harder to get.
And you can just lay it up. You don't have to vacuum bag it?
No, we just do a hand layup job.
You do a hand layup.
But we use the Kevlar and for most of the hull and the stringer, stuff like that. And on the side, then we use a carbon fiber on the inside of the sides itself. And then the deck is all carbon fiber, console, bait wells, hatches, all that stuff.
And you make every part of that hull, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Everything is made. You don't buy a center console from somebody and glass it in. You make yours, correct?
Yeah. Like the console, I designed it myself to be aerodynamic, but still be able to put at least a 12-inch GPS screen on it and your gauges. And we use Lavorsi throttles and controls where you got separate shift from the throttle.
Okay.
Because that gives you a better feel. An offshore boat, you got to have that so that you can throttle it accordingly. You don't really need that much on flats boat, but it makes it look trick and people like it.
Sure.
And it's still easy, but the control boxes where it's Mercury or Suzuki or whoever that's got both throttle and shift in it is just a lot stiffer.
I see.
And you don't get that smooth feel.
I gotcha. And it's still cable actuated, right? It's not electric. Yes,
most of them are cable actuated. I know Mercury's got the bigger motors. It's got the fly-by-wire.
Right.
And Suzuki just come out with the 115, 140 fly-by-wire.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Interesting. And how much does your hull weigh?
The complete boat with the gas tank in it, and before you start rigging it, it's a little less than 700 pounds.
Amazing. And rigged, fully rigged, wet, ready to go?
I haven't weighed one, but like a 115 weighs 360.
Okay.
And fuel and everything, it's probably 1,100 pounds, something like that.
Unbelievable.
Because the jack plate we use on the 115, hydraulic jack plate comes standard on it, it weighs 27 pounds. But you can only put a 115 motor on that.
Gotcha.
So if you go to 150, you got to use a Bob's jack plate. Then that weighs like 40 pounds, but you could put a 300 horsepower motor on. So,
would you even ever put a 300 on that?
I'd like to.
And here we go.
Yeah.
Would the boat, because of the added weight of a 300 though, would that be okay? Will the boat still plane the same way?
Well, it would handle different because the 300 weighs 500 pounds. So that's not too much more than what the 150 weighs.
Okay.
The 150, Mercury advertises at 460. So it's not that much different. But like on the bass boats, they extend when they put like a Bullet or an Allison.
Yep.
They use a 10 to 12-inch jack plate, sometimes a 14-inch. And the reason for that is the wheelbase, what I call, where the water comes off the pad in the back. By the time it gets to the prop, the longer you can get that wheelbase, the more stability you got for flying over backwards with it.
And it's funny you mentioned that because there's someone local actually who is really big into the Allisons, and he constantly says, you got to put it back. You got to put it back. And so many people will argue and fight with him. And I've been in his boat, his Allison, his old Allison fishing boat, over 100 miles an hour, and I got to tell you, it works. And the Allison has that lip that a lot of people shave off, and I don't know too much about it, but I know that some people have shaved that off. But does your HydraStepp, and is there a model number?
The 18.
The 18. Okay. Do you have plans of larger ones now?
I've had people talk to me about making it 21, but
Really?
we haven't decided to do it yet.
And can you just, is your design scalable so you can just make it longer and still keep everything else the same?
Yeah.
It can be.
Yeah.
So this pad will work infinite.
Well,
to a degree, obviously.
Yeah, the pad is wide enough and it's deep enough, and the way the lifting streaks and everything, I could increase the weight probably 1,200 pounds on the boat. Wow. And put the big motor on it, and it would accept it. Mm-hmm.
How fast do you think it would go with a 300?
Well, the Allison and Bullets with the 300Rs are running over 100. They're running 105, 110, right in that range. But the biggest thing on that is aerodynamics. Mm-hmm. I've got some pretty good sized concave chines that makes the boat super dry, because a lot of people are, when you're sitting down low like that and you hit waves, that water just splashes back up on you and it's aggravating. So I've got big concave chines on it, which would not lend itself too good to 100 mile an hour.
Oh, I gotcha.
So the farther back you get that motor would be very important. In that way, because you're running that fast, it's packing air around the front of the boat. Even though it rides at about 4-degree angle with the 115 or the 150, the 300 would probably run about the same angle. Gotcha. So, you got some airflow coming in the front, and you got to shed it off the back. So the chines lifts it with 60, 70, 80 mile an hour. Could lift it too much at 100 miles an hour.
Right.
But too, I think I could take like a 200 or 250 and run up in the 80s or 90s. If you just want to spend the time on making it do it.
And has anybody ever asked you, can you turn this boat into a fun, not a race boat per se, but a high performance boat? Something that's similar to an Allison or HydroStream, any of those other types of boats that are smaller, fun, 2-3 passenger.
Yeah, I've had some interest in it, but and it could be done. Anything can be done. You could change the deck all around to do whatever you want to do with it. It just seems like the inshore guys and the saltwater guys likes that setting on the back deck. And setting up high. Of course, the bass boats set down low in the boat because they don't have to worry about shallow water that much. But see, the inshore and the shallow water we have in Florida, you want to set up as high as you can get. Gives you a better advantage to be able to see that. Now, that's sort of, in a way, old thinking too, because you put a GPS on it and it's going to show you where the shallow water is, So you really don't have to look at that shallow water as much as you think.
How much water does the boat draft?
With the 115 on it, it runs 7 to 8 inches.
Incredible.
In other words, it'll set in that water where a guy can pull it or push it, or a trolling motor can pull it through there.
That's amazing.
We've got one with a 60, Mercury's new 60R, and it's between 6 and 7 inches.
Wow.
But the wider the boat is, it's 93 inches wide. So it gives you that flotation where they can float in shallow water, but it's still got a 14-degree dead rise. Gotcha. Where a lot of the boats that float in real shallow water are flat bottom boats, pretty much a real low dead rise. So you go out across the bay and you're just going to get daylights beat out of you. So this gives you the ability to float in shallow water, but still got a deep V that'll get you across the water in comfort as much as a 18-foot, 700-pound boat's going to do.
Right.
But one of the things I do too is I put 2 bait wells in it. They're 28 gallons apiece. I put one in the front, one in the back. And the one in the front can be used as like a ballast tank, like we used to use in offshore race boats, because we'd turn around and heading into the wind and it'd be rougher seas. So we'd fill the ballast tank. You run downwind, we'd empty it.
Wow.
So you got the advantage of that. So
that's really cool. And have you taken the boat into choppy water just to see? I mean, for people that don't know, we live in Florida where even rivers go to lakes such as Lake George, which gets really rough, like scary rough, right? Because it's so shallow. So to have 2-3 footers there is not uncommon. So while it's an inshore boat, you can still get into rough water inshore, correct?
Yeah. Well, like the 4th of July, my wife and I went over to Homosassa Springs.
Okay.
And go out through there, and you go out where they're scalloping, and you're out 4 or 5 miles.
Yep.
And the wind's going to blow up and get choppy. Or a little storm comes up, and the 300-400 boats that's out there decide they want to come in all at the same time.
Right.
So you get to test it, just by using it, you get to test a lot of different places. And we've had it, in the Keys and about every place up and down Florida and around. But it takes rough water real good. But it's part of the design, the concave chines, and really spreads that water down and it makes it a very dry boat. And if it gets too rough, you can stand up and run the thing too, like you do a normal center console.
Gotcha. And what does this boat cost with a 115?
A 115 and trailer and a 9-inch GPS, we priced at $46,000.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. So where do you go from here?
Well, we're just.
I mean, at what point does Steve Stepp say, "I've had enough"?
Don't think that'll happen.
No.
No, I enjoy myself too much and playing with boats. And I realized too that there's nothing else I enjoy more than working on boats, playing on boats, beating on propellers, and playing with bottom design. The perfect bottom design has never been made yet. So it's still out there, and every bottom can be improved and made better. And a lot of people don't understand that. And I get it all the time. They say, I don't want to go that fast. Well, most time they don't want to admit to it.
That they want to go that fast?
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell them, I said, well, the throttle's adjustable, just like the one on your car. You don't have to run wide open all the time. But the bottom design, when it runs fast, shows the good part of the bottom design, because it is capable of running fast. The hydrodynamics is good. The aerodynamics is good. And that's what gives you good gas mileage.
Right.
You take a boat that put a 115 on it, don't run but 50 miles an hour, it's not going to get near the gas mileage that a boat can run 70 miles an hour.
Sure. So, and I think it's important to say that you're doing all of this, all of your whole design is not using the I don't want to say the latest and greatest, because modern software such as CFD is only as good as the user. However, you're doing it the old school way, right? You're truly like a pioneer of hull design. Do you feel that you've gotten the credit that you deserve?
Well, you always wonder about that. A good friend of mine up in Charlotte, North Carolina, just passed away, and I got to spend a lot of time with Bobby Allison.
Okay.
And he's a good example. Never got the credit that man deserved over the years, and just such a wonderful family and wonderful guy. But, I got to go and do a lot more things than I ever thought I would.
Have you?
And see a lot more things, and meet a lot more people than most people, and met a lot of different stars and stuff. So thoroughly have enjoyed it. But I tell people sometimes I'd have had more fun if I'd had more money, but it might have been worse too,
That's true. That is very true. And I think it's also, and that leads to a great point of you never did this because of the money. You did it for the passion, right? You had a passion that you followed, and still to this day, you do it because you love it. You're not doing it because you need to build HydraStepp, right?
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
And without getting into your age, which I'm sure you don't want to talk about, you certainly don't need to be doing this for the money and the everything else that goes along with it. You're truly doing it based on passion.
Yeah, definitely passionate about it and enjoy it. And it's my way of working out too, is to get involved in part of it, because I'm not afraid of work. And my dad taught me that. And I try to teach my daughter that. And I think she learned it real good. I got her started working at the shop when she's like 12 years old. And every year she'd come back from the college, she'd work at the shop, and I'd put her on different projects and stuff. And I'd try to get her out, and we'd go eat lunch together away from the salesmen and different people, and get a chance to spend more time with her and talk to her. And one day she said, "Day, I guess you wish you'd had a son." I said, "No, man, why?" She said, "Well, son, boy, had been tickled to death to go to college, come back and be in the high performance boat business. Every boy in the world would love to do that." She says, "I don't want to be in the boat business." I said, "Well, I don't want you in the boat business, Amanda." And she said, "Well, why'd you always make me come to work?" I says, "I want you to learn business, and then you go find your passion, what you love to do, and you got the business background to do it."
There
You know, and just turned out we was up in Kentucky this weekend, and she's at 35. She's buying the real estate agency that she's worked at for the last 10 years.
Wow. So that's her passion, real estate.
Yeah. And she's done a good job and loves to talk to people and help people, and just,
That's great.
she's doing good.
So do you think that HydraStepp is going to take off to the point where it gets like Velocity, where now you're building more boats and more boats every month, and it becomes something that you never really thought it would?
Well, I want to control it more. I don't want a big company again. I want to keep it low, high quality, low volume, and I'd like
Fun. And fun, right?
And fun. And I'd like to make it the highest price flats boat, but got to work my reputation in the fishing industry, and I think I got a big advantage over a lot of people.
Sure.
And make a good quality boat, and have fun at doing it, and meet some nice people. And that's part of the fun of meeting the people and getting to know customers. And
Great.
they're not just customers; they end up just being friends. And I got Velocity customers like 3 generations, and
That's incredible.
just neat people.
And you're not involved in Velocity at all anymore, correct?
No.
Okay. Just want to make sure we make that clear.
Yeah.
Okay. And you haven't been for years, correct?
Right. Since I sold out in 78, about 8 years ago.
8 years ago. Yeah. Okay. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And the HydraStepp is certainly a fantastic boat to see. And the craftsmanship is absolutely incredible. And I want to say that when I saw the boat in Daytona and I looked inside, you don't finish it with gel coat on the inside. And that's done for a reason, not only for the weight purpose and all, and I'm sure you'd happily finish it. However, it doesn't need to be finished because it looks so good and just pristine inside. And I think that is great because, let's face it, you can hide a lot of imperfections, right, by finishing over a raw material. Yeah. And the HydraStepp is it's fantastic. I encourage everyone to go to HydraStepp.com to see it and inquire with Steve if they have any questions.
All right. Appreciate it,
so
Jason.
much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Find us on YouTube and Facebook at The Intellectual People Podcast and online at theintellectualpeoplepodcast.com. Check back for exciting new episodes.